Oh, well, hello there, my friends. Just kidding. Hello, my friends. Welcome back. So we just learned about our prenatal aspects. We learned about kind of the intro into our development, and now we are going to dive into our first theorist, which is Piaget, along with attachment and parenting styles. So this will be modules 44 through 45. So let's get started. So cognitive child development is Jean Piaget. Um, you need to know Piaget's name. So what I would do is this is our first kind of developmental theorist. So I would just highlight Piaget's name and like a nice highlighter. Um, we'll be going over our other two theorists later in the modules. So that'll be Kohlberg and Erickson, but Piaget, Kohlberg, and Erickson, they are our structure for this unit. So make sure we like highlight Piaget. This is all of the modules kind of falls under his lens, okay? So Piaget, what a nice guy. Like, look at him. He looks like a great grandpa, right? He is considered the father of modern day developmental psychology. He really focused on cognitive development within children. So we're going to look at Erickson and Kohlberg, and they focused on different aspects of development. So for Piaget, please highlight and put under cognitive development. He did not look at the physical aspects of development. He looked at the cognitive development within children, which is our mental activities associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. And something that you really want to know about Piaget as well is that, thinking back to our first lecture module where it's like, nature versus nurture, stages versus continuity, Piaget believed that children's mind developed in stages. Okay. He believed at this time, they're right here. At age 2, they're right here. During this stage, they're right here. He was into stages while the other theorists we'll learn about were all on spectrums. Okay, so something you really need to know about Piaget is that he focused on stages. He believed in stages instead of on a spectrum. Okay, so you know how some doctors are like, oh, he's just a late bloomer, right? Piaget was like, no, like stages. Okay, this happens. Okay, so before we dive in, just a little review on our memory and cognition unit, right? So Piaget looked at how we develop schemas, concepts, right? So as children experience new things, we create schemas, which are created in, they shape our ideas into one or two ways, which is assimilation and accommodation, these are old buzzword vocab terms. So assimilation is when, we start to interpret new information. So for example, this is our pet category or our zoo category of animals, right? And then accommodation is as they get older, we are able to adapt existing schemas. So accommodation would be knowing that, oh, even though a truck is a car, right? So like our assimilation used to be these are car types. Now we have the accommodation where we can tell the difference of cars within trucks, SUVs, right? Four-door, like you can think of anything you want, but that's an addition to our cognitive pathways. So again, Piaget looking at cognition and developmental stages. So, Piaget, his main question is, what are these children thinking, right? And so if we were to see this video, it's like a child trying to like stick their foot into like a toy car saying in, because clearly the kid knows that we get into cars, but their size is all wrong, right? So that is what really drove the Piaget's, what are, this cognition aspect of what are children thinking, right? So we are going to spend some time on this next slide. Please spend some time copying the slide down. This is Piaget's cognitive development steps. We will have these graphs for each of our theorists, or shall I say tables, okay? So really take a moment, write these out. We need to copy this slide. So Piaget's cognitive development is in 4 stages. And remember, we're saying stages, right? Because he has ages that are connected to these stages. Because remember, he's a theorist that believes in stages, okay? The other 2 are spectrum. Don't have to be associated with an age per se. So our first stage, according to Piaget, is our sensory motor stage. And this is at birth to 2 years old, okay? So within the sensory motor stage, I'm going to read it through and then I'm going to tell you what we should highlight within each stage, okay? And then after we go through these, each slide after will kind of explain each stage again. So if you want to kind of leave a little space on each side so you can add more notes to it in our next slide. So sensory motor, this is from birth to 2 years old. This is when we experience the world through our movement and senses. So what I would like you to highlight is this is when we start to develop schemas. We begin to act intentionally. And what I want you to highlight, which is also a vocab term, this is when we start to understand object permanence. That is a vocab term that will be explained in the next slide. So hang in there, but this will be explained. So each of our stages will have one extra slide to go into them, okay? So please write this down, then highlight for vocab, object permanence. So each of our stages has an important vocab attached to it. So sensory motor stage, this is when we start to develop object permanence. And we'll go over what that means in our next slide, okay? So sensory motor, object permanence. That is when this understanding of object permanence starts to happen. In the pre-operational stage, which is between the ages of 2 to 6, I'll read it again and then we'll go over the highlighted words. So this is when a child acquires motor skills, right? So the motor skills are there, right? Holding a pencil, kicking a soccer ball, it's motor movement, right? But they don't understand conservation. That is our next vocab word. So please highlight conservation of physical properties, and we'll explain what it means next slide, so hang in there. And this is when a child begins the stage of thinking egocentrically, which means it's all about themselves, right? But ends with a basic understanding of other minds. So they're starting to understand why Sally might be mad that you stole a toy, right? They're understanding, so they're starting to look into be like, oh, there might be another side to things, right? But right now, I want you to highlight conservation and egocentric. Conservation and egocentric. In our third stage, this is when a child can think logically about physical objects and the events and understands conservation of physical properties. So again, highlighting understands conservation. Because remember, this one, they don't understand conservation, okay? So again, this one, understanding conservation, and we'll explain what that means in our next slides. And then last but not least, so Piaget was really into child development, right? So the formal operational stage, which is our last little stage at the end, he didn't put a lot of time into, and so everyone always jokes he really only has 3 stages because the 4th stage was kind of like a gimme. But formal operations is from 11 years up, right? So as we grow up, this is when we can think logically about abstract concepts. So that's what you want to highlight. We are able to logically think about abstract concepts. So almost like we can start creating hypotheses, right? And that's the end of the cognitive development that Piaget has formed, okay? So now we're going to go into each stage one by one and just go over a few little details of the vocab. So for our sensory motor stage, we have this idea of object permanence. So so right next to object permanence, I want you guys to write peekaboo, the peekaboo game, because object permanence is the idea that objects continue to exist even though they're not visible. So for a baby, so this is peekaboo. So for babies who literally think your face disappears and then you say peekaboo and it works for them and they start laughing and they're like, where'd you go, right? They have not experienced object permanence. An object has not been permanent. But for babies who no longer fall for the peekaboo and they try to pull your hand away to see your face because they know you're still there, they have object permanence. So right next to object permanence, write peekaboo. It's the peekaboo game, okay? So, just a heads up, peekaboo game. All right. And then, so for Piaget's stage 2, so this is where our theory of mind. So real quick, let me see if I can go backwards real quick. So in this stage, We want to make sure we say theory of mind, which is the understanding of other minds. I just didn't write the actual term for it. So we are on theory of mind. And this is when children start to grasp that other people have feelings as well. It's not just about them. There's a reason that Sally's feeling upset that you stole her toy, right? So think preschool and kindergarten for another reason why we try to teach emotions and, I feel this way, you feel this way, because, children start to realize that it's not just their feelings and perceptions, but they also will start to think about their friends' mental states as well, right? So theory of mind is when children start to develop it, they start to realize that's why Sally's upset, right? But if they don't have theory of mind, they're like, they stole my toy, and that's like the end of it, right? It's like it's all about you, right? Right. So Piaget's third stage is concrete operations, and this is when we learn about the conservation aspect. And I have a really cool demo. I hope it works. But essentially, think of this as science class. Okay, so right next to this, write science class. And conservation is this: the notion that properties such as mass, volume, and numbers remain the same despite the difference of forms. So think about your earliest science class, right? And it's the law of conservation. And so, for example, this is when you have two. So this is what you would do in front of a kid to see if they have conservation or not. You fill the cup equally into the same glasses, right? So the kids know they're going to ask, like, is it the same? Is there the same amount of water? And they're going to say yes. But if you pour that same amount of water into a different cup and you ask which one contains more water, if they say this one, they do not have the law of conservation down yet, right? They think it just because it looks longer, it looks bigger. But if they say, Miss H, it's the same for either one, they have the law of conservation. They know that even though it's in a different shape, it's the same amount. Similar to this experiment was done with M&Ms where they spread out a line of 10 M&Ms to be really big, and then there's another row of 10 M&Ms that are really close together, and the kids have to tell you which one has more conservation, my friends, right? So law of conservation. And then the fourth stage, formal operations, right? Again, it's just that we can solve abstract concepts. We are able to do hypotheses. We are able to think of something without actually like having it be there right in front of us, right? So just think of this one as abstract thinking. Science class, okay? Science class. So, we have some criticism of Piaget's work, and, a big one is Piaget still believes in stages, and modern developmental psychologists are really onto they're really for the continuum, right? There's really, if your child is 3 years old and showing this when they're supposed to be 5, right? So again, Piaget has the most kind of backlash when it comes to him saying that there are stages. All right, my people. So now we are going to just talk a little bit about one of my favorite psychologists, which Vygotsky is not as much in our textbook as I wish, but I wrote lots of papers on him. He was kind of the guy I studied a lot in college, and it had to do with psychology through an education standpoint. So he created something called the zone of proximal development, and that's what I studied a lot. But let me move my image. Okay, so you can see that. So Lev Vygotsky was born in 1896, same year as Piaget. And Vygotsky really focused on how social and cultural interaction also guides our cognitive development. Not just our regular brain development, but what's happening around us, right, can affect our brain development. And if in PGA's view the child is like a scientist, Vygotsky believes the child is more like an apprentice, learning by interacting with others in specific contexts. So again, Vygotsky, he's my guy. And if you ever want to learn more about zone of proximal development, you just let me know. But anyway, so looking at what does the social development look like, right, through this lens, and we are now going to go into attachment. And this should be like in your notes, do a little squiggle. And there was this study the Harlow monkeys, and we found something very interesting out about attachment. And what we found was that the emotional bond that forms between newborns and their caregivers. I did not say parents, I said caregivers, the ones that take care, right? What they found is that, uh, okay, so let me back up a little. So Henry and Margaret Harlow, they learned about attachment when they conducted experiments with monkeys and a clothed mother back in the 1950s. So, what it looks like is this. So, the monkey would have two options. When they are put into this environment where they can either go to the monkey that has the milk. So, there's a monkey mother, a fake monkey mother that has milk, and then there's a fake monkey mother that has cloth and it's for comfort and warmth and contact. And what they found, they were wondering what would the babies favor more? They favored the mother that had contact comfort. They, what we discovered is that young baby monkeys, and this is true for also infants, the ability to feel relaxed and peaceful and comforted by skin to skin contact is more important than food. The monkey spent way more time on the cloth mother than they were on the monkey that had the food. So when it comes to attachment, it is something we deeply crave innately within us, right? Because remember, we are social beings. So again, what we've learned from the Harlow monkey experiment is contact comfort was more important than food. And, you know, after this kind of came out, and another little squiggle, because that was the Harlow monkey study. After the Harlow monkey study came out, Mary Ainsworth started doing research on something that's called the strange situation. And it's to test the measure of level of attachment in which a mother and a child enter an unfamiliar room. So think of preschool, right? And while the mother lets the child explore, she sits down, and then an adult stranger enters the room as the mother leaves, and and then they want to see how the kids react. So if you're thinking about preschool, okay, so I worked at Snow Estates Children's School, right? It was a constant battle of having mother or father leave the room. You guys know kids are kicking and screaming, but Mary Ainsworth discovered really interesting attachment styles that we're going to learn about from her observation. So let's learn about Mary Ainsworth's attachment styles. Um, but the first thing before we learn about, okay, my people, I had a little camera screencastify malfunction and I couldn't find how to get my toolbar back. So we're just going to restart over the slides that kind of had all the hustle bustle in it. So going back to the stranger situation, right? So this is about Mary Ainsworth, and she came up with this experiment called the strange situation where it was a way to study attachment and what type of attachment children have to their caregivers. And how it worked was she would have the mom and the child come in and sit down, kind of like in a preschool. They had a playroom, and then they would try to have the mom leave while another stranger came in, and they would gauge the child's reaction. And this led to kind of not, I would say the discovery, but more of an emphasis into what these attachment styles mean. And so let's see what 3 attachment styles she came up with. So the 3 attachment styles that she came up with are, all right, sorry, my people, another one. My fiance came in because he got off work earlier. So, okay. Sorry for all the little hiccups in this last little part of the video. So the 3 attachment styles that Mary Ainsworth came up was secure attachment, and there's 2 types of insecure. There's ambivalent and avoidant. So the most ideal style for the healthiest children, right, for like the correlational studies, secure attachment is when kids sought out caregiver. So it's okay if they were upset when mom left, but then they also got over it really easy because they are secure in knowing that mom is coming back. And so essentially how the reactions they were looking at how the kids and the mom interact essentially when she left the room and when she came back. And secure attachment kids sought out their caregiver upon return, warm, engaged, kids who run up and hug their parents because they have a sense of calm when they're with them and they feel safe. That is a secure attachment. The insecure attachments is when if essentially, when it comes to CPS, teachers play a really big role in seeing how kids are attached to their caregiver, right? So if people notice an insecure attachment, which I'll go over, those are also the reasons that CPS can be called to do a check. So an ambivalent insecure attachment is when kids have mixed responses to when their caregiver returns. They're anxious, on or off again. This usually leads to an unstable home life where the kid cannot depend on the parent all the time. That's why the reactions are different, okay? Then there's avoidant insecure attachment, which kids completely ignore their caregiver at return. They do not lean on their caregiver for any comfort. That usually shows signs that the guardians are not around or pay little attention to the child because the child does not have a secure comfort with the adult, which would usually be happening, right? So again, numerous studies have supported Ainsworth's conclusions, and they also have revealed that these attachment styles early on can help predict behaviors later on in their life as well. So Ainsworth's findings, right? So children who are securely attached tend to be more socially, emotionally well-adjusted and are seen as more cooperative and capable and playful. Yet children who lack a secure attachment don't always have difficulties in later life, but there tends to be some ripple effect aspects. So for example, if you had a insecure, avoidant attachment with your parent where you never leaned on them for support, right? Usually people who have this type of attachment later on have a hard time trusting and making connections with other people later on just because they're not used to having a support person, if that makes sense. They found something else to lean on, right? And last but not least, to end our little module, we have our 3 different types of parenting styles. And this is always fun because kids always like to say what type of parents they got at home. So there's 3 types. And Baumrind is the one who came up with these parenting styles. And let's go through them together, shall we? So we have the authoritarian. This is my mother, my friends. The authoritarian parenting style is high behavior standards, strict punishment and misconduct, little communication. And what that means is that there's no compromising. You just do what you're told, right? Because I said so. That is authoritarian, right? That is authoritarian. And then we have permissive, which is on the complete other end, where these type of parents are high nurturing and communication, little discipline and guidance or control. I always like to say, like, if you ever have like a hippie parent, this is usually them, right? These are the type B parents who are like, do what you want, right? Like, come home whenever. Guys, I just wished I was, oh my gosh, that household. Anyway, and then there is the beautifulness of the two, and it is authoritative. So authoritarian and permissive, not the best results in the long run, but authoritative is the best parenting style out there, is what they're finding. Sets limits but listens, room for compromise, flexible, and it usually leads to higher self-esteem and social competence within children. This is the parents that will let you listen to see like your side of the story before they make any rulings, right? And so authoritative tends to be the perfect little mixture of both, right? We need structure. We also need high nurturing, right? But how can we mix the both? And authoritative is that beautiful middle piece. Okay, so just thinking back to what type of parenting styles your parents have, and just think about it, my friends, okay? All right, that's it for this module. Come back for our next one.